D. Kauwila Mahi is an Oiwi, Hawaii visual artist, archivist, video game designer, and composer from Maunalua, Oahu, Hawaii, who has exhibited art internationally in places such as Hawaii, Aotearoa, Turtle Island, Canada, and the United States. Kauwila's work embodies genealogical rhythms of sovereignty, solidarity, ceremony, and contested governance through Olelo, Hawaii. They have served as a sound designer and sound design mentor in award-winning Olelo Hawaii video games, Heauho and Vau Kanaka, and have won the Jim Winters Award for 3D dimensional design for their piece Hui Kavala Ki'i Kalamai in Honolulu Museum of Art's biannual show Artists of Hawaii 2021. Kauwila has also been a Hawaiian language translator for multiple universities and indigenous community histories across Turtle Island while mentoring both graduate and undergraduate students in translation theory and praxis. Kauwila's work resides in the margins of Aloha Aina, traversing an indigenous future while refusing state-sponsored violent reproductions of militarism and missionary descendants. Through their work, they interpolate and remix ancestral chant stories, acoustemologies, love that, and instrumentation underscoring the rhythm of the underbelly of Hawaii. Kauwila credits his matriarchal genealogy of lay makers, feather workers, and Hawaiian sovereignty photographers for the accolades they have received. Mahalo, Kauwila. You can consider everything. Okay. O I no I anei, o ka momole uaua, o ka viva ole o ke ka ili akua, I noho ia maa I ka hakakahu. Noho kūkaʻilimoku I lino o maa, noho wanana I ka lilo o ka aina, lilo ka moku o hulu, ia kua kāne, o ka pule mana a maa I ke akua. Eia ke ai ke akua, e kūnui akea, e kūkaʻilimoku, he ai ola, he ai mana, he ai ola loa. E ola ia o e kū ko'o, e au ke ola a kani ko'o. E kani ko'o a pala lauhala, e haumaka I ole, ka I kōko. Kau a ola I ke akua e kū. E kū nui a kea, e kū ko'o, o ka pule ia, e ola I. Okay, so I started this pule. It's actually part of a kanikau, which is a lamentation chant or dirge that oftentimes intimate people's relationship to different aina and how the person's relationship who composed this mele, or sometimes they inherit this mele, they compose it oftentimes drawing comparisons of the aina, the ua, the kahavai, all the rains, the winds, the rivers, all of these things are part of, also likened to the person's person. And in Kaniko, you'll get a lot of intimate knowledge that aren't offered in other places in other archives. Sometimes you'll get very intimate Omakua name for a specific person. Sometimes you'll get river names that don't exist anywhere else in archives. Sometimes you'll get wind names and rain names that the composer give to this person who passed away, or sometimes a relationship that has ended. And this particular kanikau was written for Analea Keohokalole, the matriarch of the Kalakaua Liliuokalani family. And there's 4 major kanikau that was composed by her, and each of the kanikau look at 4 of the major akua, ku, lono, kane, and kanaloa, and each one offers different insights into those 4 major akua. Today, I'm going to talk story a little bit about methodology, how I share mo'olelo. I'm going to talk about Kolili Pono Nā Hulu iluna, or Kolili Pono Nā Hulu iluna. The feathers stand upright, which is how Kūkaʻilimoku and the feathers that are on top of Kūkaʻilimoku are described inside of our archives. And this is actually a postcard of Kūkaʻilimoku from Bishop Museum. They used to make postcards of these kind of things before in the 70s. So this is kind of the ala kike eke, or the path that we'll be going through today.
I'll talk about makila ia ika lei hoʻokahi, or how things are strung into a lei, as a description for my methodology. I'm gonna talk a little bit about he moʻoku auhau ea, a genealogy of ea, how people have talked about it, how it has reemerged in contemporary scholarship, and how people have been enacting it outside of academia. Kūkaʻilimoku, kia kūkaʻili ea, or the role of kūkaʻilimoku. Oh, sorry for the typo. And their capacity to snatch air or bring air out. And then kind of panina and close out the space, talking through a couple of different mele or different songs. So my methodology, makila ia ika lei hoʻokahi, comes from my tutuhine, my great grandma who helped raise me. She's a mana leo from Molokaʻi. And she was a really well-known lei maker on Maui and Molokaʻi and even Oahu. And she made her living off of making lei hulu. And she would sell, or she would make roughly 400 lei hulu a year and sell them to Kamehameha schools for their song contest from the 1970s to the early 1990s. And our ohana helped with all of that. But this is her, my tutu. And when I talk about methodology, what I'm trying to do is this idea of makila, and makila is a Maui-specific term for a needle to string a lei. And each island has their own term for these kinds of needles, and they're not needles like metal needles like we use now, but they can be used and applied in that terminology today. And if you're looking for other terminology for stringing lei and needles, these are, when we talk about lei hulu, it's important to know kind of the process of like gathering manu. And so for our kūpuna, I think a lot of people kind of gloss over like, oh yeah, our kūpuna, they put sap on tea leaf, or they put them on tree stumps and ensnared birds. And that's kind of as far as most people will go into the details of what we now contemporarily call kia manu, or to ensnare birds. But these are some other important terminology if you really want to dive in on mo'olelo relating to these practices and get more intimate details. And so Kawili and Pili will be ones that draw a lot more, especially with specific manu, which are the manu o'o. And kia is kind of a general term for ensnaring manu. And kapi'o is typically reserved as a metaphor for ensnaring a lover who you call a manu. So all of them are really important. Probably this one is the most important for you folks, kapi'o manu. But I don't want to know about that. And I mentioned earlier, there are specific terms for specific islands for this process of stringing and the needles that are used for lei. And manai is a general term, but manai is also the term that you would use for a fish hook that's used in ceremony. And so if you go to places like Bishop Museum, you see that giant hook that's inside of like the oceanic part on the first floor. That's what a manai looks like in real life. And the manaya kalani is the name of Maui's fish hook, but manaya kalani is actually also the name of the hook when you sacrifice a person in ceremony. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe we'll plan to sacrifice some po'emalihini if we need to. I'll walk through the process if we need. And so again, manai is one term. Hanai is a Hawaii island version of the term. Makila, I mentioned earlier, is a Maui version of the term. And Mokila is a Kauai version of the term. And most of these you won't hear anymore. They often appear in mele though. And so if you're looking in archives outside of Nupepa and you go to places like Bishop Museum and look at the mele archives, you'll see these terms very often. And this is my tutu again with lei on the boss. And so there's framework for my methodology where I talk about lei hulu and stringing together different hulu from different manu, ensnaring different birds with different skill sets. I try to apply into different pauku to string one lei to offer you folks from different mo'olelo, from different wahi, so that you folks can be deck this lei and take it with you and use it to learn, use it to critique, use it to talk shit if you need to, whatever it is that you need to do. I'm giving this lei and my methodology that I inherited from my kūpuna, from my tutu directly. And so one pauku, which is like a portion of a lei, is also a term that we use for a paragraph. Has to do with this framing, and it's this. And I'll start right here. O ke ana o Kūkaʻilimoku, o kūkalani hoʻoneʻenuu, a me kūkeolo ewa, o like lākou me ke kolona, he mau lei lākou no nā mōʻī. Makaaʻi I ka wā kaua a me nā wā pōpilikia, which I interpret as Kūkaʻilimoku, kūkalani hoʻoneʻenuu, and kūkeolo ewa are like crowns, and they are like lei for the mōʻī to adorn around their necks during a war and battle and tribulations. And this is written by Samuel Manaya Kalani Kamakau in Kamaʻolelo Hawaii and Nupepa Kuʻokoʻa. So that framing of taking the lei as a comparison for Kūkaʻilimoku is how I'm going to talk about Kūkaʻilimoku for the rest of this presentation. Okay, and there's a really cool series that's printed inside of Nupepa Kuʻokoʻa. The original composer or writer is Z. Keowokalani, who's pretty unknown in Nupepa, at least in comparison to Kamakau. And he does a very short series about how different manu, or different birds, aviary, whatever you like call them, interact with Aina and interact with people inside of our Nupepa. And in one of the clippings, they talk about the manu mamo in specific. And they say, "Aka ina e nalo ka pe'e ana ki Kanaka Kauwila Manu, a ike ole o ia ho'i kona meheu e ka mamo, a leila e noho pa'ano ke la me kona kumula'au, a pili wale ho'i ke pau, a ke Kanaka ma'alea or ma'alea." It's both. And a rough interpretation is if these folk, so they're giving context to the mamo bird and kind of the ensnaring practices that people try to do, and also different mo'olelo about the mamo in the longer clipping. But this portion is talking about how a person who is a kapili manu, who is trying to ensnare this bird, uses ke pau to basically they camouflage themselves in the ulula'au, in the vehi of the forest, in the greenery, the lush verdant forest. And they use the kepao, which is a sticky sap that they use from different trees, actually. People usually only know about the kukui, which is typically called pilali, but they use different saps from different trees for different birds, because some of them have bigger wings, some are faster, etc. And this term kepao is really important because it's also utilized to describe na huakepao or the po'e huakepao, which are the type makers, or the people that typeset the newspapers inside of our Hawaiian language archive. And this is a photo, I think it's 1896, of some of the folks in Kealoha Aina, one of the most radical Hawaiian language newspapers, founded by Joseph Navahi Kalani Opu'u, and then taken over later by Emma Aima Navahi after his passing. And these are some of the kiki huakepao. So these are some of the kid typesetters. And that leads me to a conversation about ea and himo'oku auhau ea. It's talking a little bit about a genealogy of ea, how this term is used today, how commonplace it's become now, and a little bit about how our kūpuna talked about ea and what different akua, what different elements, gods, whatever you like call them, are apply this framing of ea and how they enact ea. And I'll explain this photo later. If you look up in Puku'i's dictionary, these are the 4 things you'll get: sovereignty, rule, independence, for la ho'iho'i'ea, life, air, breath, respiration, etc. To rise up, to go up, raise, become erect, and to smell, also the variant spelling of okina i'e, or u'ina i'e. So these are kind of the dictionary definitions that people use just to kind of get an understanding of what ea is. And so you can already see this is limiting in how our kūpuna configure what ea is. And that doesn't mean Pukeʻi's work isn't important. In fact, it is essential to us and our understanding of ea. It's just, this is a starting point for us to really get into the depths and the kauna, the polysemic meanings of different terms. And so I think folks kind of know the appropriated or maybe inappropriated state motto, which comes from a speech delivered by Kamehameha Ekolu Kauwila Mahi, Kamehameha III Kauwila Mahi, after the restoration of ea to his lahui, to his nation, to his aupuni, to Hawaii Aina, the Hawaiian archipelago. Most people actually misinterpret it now as the Hawaiian Kingdom. And this is Kauwila Gate, the front gate that most people enter through. And if you're doing a procession, this is the gate you would enter through ceremoniously in the 19th century to Kahalealiʻi Iolani, what we now call Iolani Palace. But after the Paulette affair, after Po'e Haole do other things that they do, after Timoteo Ha'alilio goes on this mission as an emissary to establish relationships with other nations to fortify and consecrate the mana of Hawaii and Ko Hawaii Aina as a sovereign state. All of these things start to happen. The rocks keep rolling. And after it's returned, after La Ho'iho'i Kauwila Kamehameha III offers that speech that we all now know, sort of, that motto, Ua mau ke eo ka aina I ka pono. But ea isn't something that is isolated or that exists in a vacuum. Folks like Timoteo Ha'alilio, who helped ensure the ea for Hawaii, often had ties with a lot of other nations that he went to while Hawaii was establishing itself as a world power by making missions with other countries all around the world at that time. And this person, John L. Na'ili'ili, composes a very important kanikau after making requests for weeks on end for people to write in mele about Timoteo Ha'alilio after his passing. And this kanikau, again, a lamentation chant or dirge, talks a little bit about Timoteo Ha'alilio's mission around the world as an emissary. And it's published in Ka'ilele, Hawaii on October 21st, 1845. And so I'll read through it and talk a little bit about the mele. But you should read the whole mele if you want to. This is only like, what, 14-ish lines. I think it's about 64 line kanikau. Usually I perform it, I'm just going to read it. But it goes, Aloha ka lehua o mo kaulele. Aloha na koa ka aalahina I ka pali. Aloha ka maile lauli o ko iahi. Aloha o kane puniu I ka velo akala. Aloha ka uluhala o ka auku I ka paia e ke au naona. Aloha ka alihi o nuu anu I ka velu hau. Aloha ka makani kūkalahale o Honolulu. Aloha o pana ewa nui, moku lehua. Aloha ke akua oki oki po o mahiki. Aloha o waiā noe noe e pipi o mai ana I ka pali. Aloha ka ua he eko ko ula I ka moana. Aloha o kini maka lehua I ka velo o ka la. Aloha o lili noe, ka wahine noha mauna. Aloha ka nāhele o ōpū o la. Aloha na waipuna a me na ki o wai o Palesetina. So you guys are going to translate this for me now. What does Nans King? So different portions in this kanikau talk about different akua, different gods, and they also talk about different vahipana and things that are heavily associated with this beloved and storied places. And so one of the most well-known Oahu ones is the Maile Lauli'i o Ko'iahi. Ko'iahi is one of the highest points on Oahu. It's also the name of a mo'o in Hi'iaka I ka poli o Pele. But this Maile Lauli'i and the fragrance of Maile Lauli'i is heavy associated with mele for Oahu and lei for Oahu, and especially for the west side of Oahu. Other places like Nu'uanu obviously are really important. This is where Kumulipo starts. Inside of the 11th Va, they start to kind of process down into the Kahakai, into what is now known as Waikahalulu, what is roughly Chinatown today. And then they talk about Lilinoi, Kawahine no Mauna, and that's a reference to Mauna Awakia. And they talk about Opuola, which is in two islands. It's on Kauai and Hawaii Island. And then it connects all of these Vahipana, all of these Akua to the Waipuna, Naki Owai, Opalesetina, or the famed springs and ponds and rivers of Palestine. So again, this air that Timoteo Ha'alilio has and consecrates and brings about isn't something that's done in isolation. It's his relationship to these other nations, to these other people, and to our own home, a really deep, intimate connection to these places that brings about air, that enacts air. And our conceptualizations of air and its return to normalcy has almost all to do with the organizing and research of Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell. Yeah, and in the 1970s and 80s, it is he who helped reestablish our celebrations of La Ho'iho'i Ea. And so when he was searching and had students research Ea and La Ho'iho'i Ea, they started to do celebrations again at what is now known as Thomas Square. And what was I gonna say? So kind of this return that we're getting from Ea, this genealogy of Ea in the 20th century, the 1900s, almost all comes from the work of Kekuni Blaisdell, at least for the term Ea. And that kind of tracks back to this really famous speech that Davida Kahale Maile offers in Manoa, actually just uka of here in 1871. And it's printed in Kanupepa Ku'oko'a on August 31st, 1871 on the second page. And this speech has been recalled a lot by folks such as Leilani Basham, who's really a person who helped spread this mo'olelo, and she is a teacher now at Kamaka Ku'okolani Center for Hawaiian Studies. And she publishes about it in her dissertation and in Hulili Journal. And then this speech comes about again in the dissertation of Kumuka Hikina de Silva in the Hawaiian Language Department. And then it emerges in A Nation Rising, which is kind of a standard book that's taught now, but wasn't standard at the time when this framing of Ea started to reemerge, especially in 2010 and beyond. And so inside of the speech, they actually started off with asking the question, He hala ke ano o ia hopuna o lelo, pla I hoi ia mai ke eo ko Hawaii pai ain. Which means, what is the meaning of this phrase or this term, this poke olelo hopuna olelo? Kala I hoi ia mai ke eo ka ko Hawaii pai aina, the day where Ea was restored to the Hawaiian archipelago. And then it say, ke eo nai a he wai, ke eo ke Kanaka he makani, o ke eo ka noa he Kanaka, ke eo ka moku he hoiuli, ke eo ko Hawaii pai aina, o ia ka noho au puni ana. And most of the interpretations that you'll see in A Nation Rising, in Kolili Journal, and other articles use this framing. So this is kind of how they would interpret it, which is the air of fish is water, the air of humans is wind, the air of the earth is the people, the air of a boat is a steering blade, the air of the Hawaiian archipelago, it is a government. And that's how most people interpret this passage. I would do it a little differently, but that's for another day. And so this framing of air, I mentioned just a little bit earlier in A Nation Rising, really helped shift how our poe in this day and age understand what air is or attempt to enact it. And so three really key framings come up in the introduction, which is how do we create a political philosophy to guide our people that is neither derived from the Western model nor a simple reaction against it. So how do we look at a non-Westphalian model? How do we ensure that we don't recapitulate the violences of Western normalcy? How do we ensure that we're not doing what the Po'ehau are doing, essentially? And there's another explanation of ea, which refers to, but is not defined by political sovereignty and is often translated as sovereignty. And it also carries the meanings life and breath, among many other things. But one of the key things that is talked about inside of this framing, A Nation Rising, is that it cannot be achieved or possessed. It requires constant action, day after day, generation after generation. In other words, ea is a struggle that we go through every day, and struggling with our comrades, struggling with our hoa, struggling with our aina is how we enact ea. That's how we bring ea back into normalcy, back into our hegemony, into our kind of standards. And this is a photo my mom took on January 17th of 1993. My mother, Kauwila Mahi, she is my first teacher and has helped me so much in these framings and really understanding what ea is. Like, sometimes I'll just call her and be like, Ma, what does ea mean? And she'll be like, well, step it up and go do research. And then she'll be like, nah, it's actually all these random things. But the reason I share this photo is that my mom was a really well-known photographer in the 1990s, struggles for ea, but now she's kind of been pushed into the back. And a really big reason of that is, one, she's wahine, and two, she's mahu, and like she has mostly iconic relationships, mostly dates women. She said, after me, I'm done with dick. So she just strictly wahine now. I'm so grateful for her. Yeah, I went there. Okay. But one thing too that we have to remember about ea and our struggles for ea is that we have to be really cognizant of the class struggle that exists within ea and kind of take away from the ivory tower or the mainstream of academia, who often touts itself as the masters of ea, who knows what is the best pathway, when really it's the po'e in our aina, the country bumpkins, if you want to call them that, the aunties, the uncles, the ana days, the people that are in between. All of those folks are the people that are really on the forefront of our struggles for ea. And they talk a little bit about this in A Nation Rising on page 37. There's a portion that's written by Anne Kelly. And they say, as a critique, they offer homeless at home, Marie Beltran and Anipau assert their rights to ea under the direst circumstances. They and each other Hawaiians who live off the legal and economic grid represent a profound manifestation of ku'e, resistance against the US occupation of Hawaii. But because their resistance derives as much from the culture of poverty as it does from the politics of Hawaiian culture, their stories get lost in a media world that won't accommodate such fine distinctions. So again, we have to be very cognizant of our class struggle in our movements and struggles for ea in order to actualize, in order to enact, in order to emerge as independent, as sovereign, and resist against American imperialism. Oh, and if you're curious about this image, it's done by Jeff Hong as part of a series called Unhappily Ever After, or Disney Unhappily Ever After. And at the end of it all, for Kanaka Maoli, the one thing we want is our relationship to Aina. So you can see, well, you can't see on Zoom, but you can see in the room, the flag, land back. I think more ways for us to conceive of this is, or people have been talking about it recently, is to claim Aina back, or Aina back meaning not just people's relationship to Aina, but people's relationship to each other inside of Aina and because of Aina, and really centralizing Aina as our kūpuna, as our ancestor who helps guide us and helps guide our movements. And it's from Haumea Papa Valinu'u, how so many different akua names, Pele, Haumea Nui Aiva Iva, Humulipo, Po'ele, all of these names for our Aina, that is our kūpuna, from which our struggles continue, and we can root them inside of this cosmogony of our people. It doesn't have to be ones that we just make up all along the way. And to kind of close this section on a genealogy of Ea, and there's so many other people writing about Ea and enacting Ea in our lahui. For instance, Kamali Kuwara, No Uruvila, Humusindi Franklin, who's in the room, folks like Noi Noi Silva, Honani K. Trask, all of these folks write about Ea inside of their books or give conversations, give speeches about our struggles for sovereignty and self-governance and independence. And to kind of close off this framing, I'd like to bring out this really important Nupepa article, which is not centered the right way, but there's a speech that Kamakau, or Samuel Manaya Kalani Kamakau, offers on October 11th of 1866. And inside of the speech he gives inside of Honolulu at a park, he starts to recite Kauwila Keauli Kamehameha III's speech and all of the things that led up to that exact moment. He also starts to draw upon different Inoa Akua and uses that as a guide to steer how Ea can be enacted. And near the end of the speech, he gives this offering. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up so I can read it without exiting that. Okay. Starts up here, but it says, Mehemea la, e olelo akuana, e kane wawahilani, e wahi kapa'a, e kūkaʻilimoku e, ka ili ia mai ke ea o ka aina. And I unuhi it or interpret the meaning as, it's as if they were stating, kane wawahilani, break what is immovable, kūkaʻilimoku, seize the ea of the aina. And it's that framing that we'll take into the next section. And then after this, Kamakau goes on a rant, and it's pretty fun if you like rants. But he argues that it's these akua, kane wawahilani, kūkaʻilimoku, who will help restore Ea to Hawaii and will seize Ea for Hawaii. And that leads to this framing, Kūkaʻilimoku, Ke Akua Ka'ili Ea, and a genealogy of Kūkaʻilimoku. So inside of our Nupepa, they talk about where the feathers of Kūkaʻilimoku come from. And one particular mo'olelo, one particular clipping, which talks about ka'apuni maka'i, or a trip to ascertain knowledge and to consecrate somebody, as opposed to a huaka'i, which is just a journey or a trip for leisure. They go to different wahipana and visit different kupua, which are, they visit different beloved places and love and storied places, and visit different deities, kupua. They're kind of like, I don't know if you folks know animorphs. If you look at the books, where they go into like different body forms between human and then different species, it's like that. Or Pokemon, whichever you like play with. But in the passage, they say, or they start to offer a genealogy of Kūkaʻilimoku and where the feathers come from. And they say, Olono pele ki kaikua ana o pa'ao, oi ki kahuna nui, a he mālama akua o pa'ao, o Kūkaʻilimoku ki akua. He akua hulu, he mau hulu hina never makali'i no ka laia o ki wa'a. Ua pepehi ia o ki wa'a e wai kele nui aiku, ma hope o kona lawe pio ana e ka manu. He mau hulu kapu ho'i nā hulu I ka lai o hina wai koli'i. Ua lele ho'i ua mau hulu nei a ki ala o nā uha o nā maka o ka ha'i. Ua lilo ua hulu nei I ka mea mana oia o Kūkaʻilimoku. E waiho ka ako ia. So I'll interpret it. Lono Pele, the older brother of Pa'ao, and that is the kahuna nui, the most important priest in that family. And it is they who helped and guided Pa'ao in Ho'omana Akua, or to give mana to an Akua, which is our traditional form of worship. You give mana to an Akua, you take it out and give it mana during a specific kau, a specific time period of the year, and you do it on a heiau. And the ceremony where you bring out this akua during different kau has to have wakia, piko wakia, which is now referred to as nahihi o nakiki, Orion's belt, has to be in the sky directly above during the equinoxes. So piko wakia, which is roughly the middle of March, roughly the middle of September. And the consecration ceremony is called Kauwila ceremony. And guess what my name is? And guess what I'm named after? But inside of that ceremony, inside of that consecration, this Kauwila ceremony guides who gets to come out. And so I give this offering kind of as a way to explain it more easily and more simply. If you play Pokemon, and inside the games, there's like laptops, and you store Pokemon in there if you have too many Pokemon. But when you need a specific Pokemon to accomplish a different or distinct thing, you take that Pokemon out of the computer, you bring them on your roster, and then you go do what you gotta do. Our kūpuna did that with their akua. They commanded them and put them to rest at different times of the year. But in certain ceremonies and certain times of the year, during Piko Oakia, during equinoxes, they would bring them out to enact whatever politic they needed during that time, whether that was a lono politic or a ku politic. They have different akua for different purposes. Sometimes sometimes to seize the air of a nation, sometimes simply to feed the people, sometimes to reignite the foodways for a certain place, which are all things that are political. It's not really like a peaceful or non-war time. So that kind of dispels the mythos that Lono is like this akua of peace. If you read the Mo'olelo, the Kamakau and Poi Poi wrote, they say there's only 4 days where there's no war, where they all train and celebrate together. So all of these mythos that we commonly understand today, saw pulukeke, saw BS, that has been normalized by mistranslations from Po'e Haole of our Mo'olelo. But again, the feathers of Kiva'a and Hinawai Koli'i are the feathers that make up Kūkaʻilimoku. And they're brought here from Kahiki with Lono Pele and Pa'ao. And they actually land on the thighs, the uha of Namaka o Kaha'i, before they send Kūkaʻilimoku over to be made into an ki'iakua hulu manu and brought to Hawaii. And so if you follow a genealogy of Kūkaʻilimoku, the next real appearance of Kūkaʻilimoku in ceremony is with Umialiloa. And sorry, with Liloa, not Umialiloa. And so Umi inherits this akua. It's not clear from where inside of the Mo'olelo, inside of our Nupepa, but Umi is the next main person to be in possession of Kūkaʻilimoku. And as we know, or if you study genealogy, if you take Kumulili Kala's class, she'll say 1,000 times over, Umi is the progenitor of Hawaiian people. Like if you cannot trace yourself to Umi, you're not Hawaiian. Like that's something she says every class, to the point where you're inundated. It almost becomes annoying, but it's not annoying because you start to memorize it, which is what she's trying to do. But in the Mo'olelo of Umialiloa, which starts ruling chiefs, but is composed by Samia Manaya Kalani Kamakau, Umi has these akua. Eventually, Umialiloa is on his trip to become consecrated after. Okay, wait, let me backtrack. Liloa meets Akahia Kuleana, who is a lower ranking chief, but is still a chief, at a river. He sees that she's bad, tries to spit game. He gets with her, they noho. And then there's Ho'ailona, there's signs and signals that they're going to have a kiki and it's going to be a chief. And in the mo'olelo, in Kamakao's version, the Ho'ailona are Kuha'o and Irilani, which are two rains that emerge from the sky without clouds. So if there's no clouds and you feel rain, that's usually a signal that they're in a li'i interacting with you, or at least in a li'i around. And again, those are Irilani and Kuha'o. But inside of the mo'olelo of Umialiloa, Umitik goes on this trip. He gets Pi'imaiva'a along the way. He has people back him up, and then he goes to Umi eventually. His older brother, Hakao, he's a fascist. He doesn't want him to rule. Eventually, Umi passes away. Umialiloa is gifted Kūkaʻilimoku, which essentially means he'll eventually be able to rule. And then Hakao is just offered rulership of the Aina. And so the next person to inherit Kūkaʻilimoku is Umialiloa. And eventually Umialiloa uses Kūkaʻilimoku to help placate himself, consecrate himself, and overthrow his fascist older brother, Hakao. And that's a ka'e of the sacred sash of Umialiloa, of Liloa. But inside of the kind of hero's path for folks such as Pi'imaiva'a, Umialiloa, oftentimes they go into really difficult paths. So if you read the Mo'olelo, Pi'imaiva'a goes to save Umialiloa because he goes around challenging chiefs kind of stupidly. But on one instance, he breaks the Niho Palawa of a chief in Hilo because it's made of wood, and he sees in his head that's not a real chief. And so what happens is, after breaking it, all the Hilo warriors and chiefs gather and ensnare him or like wrap him up, and they're gonna tie him up to kill him. And so Pi'imaiva'a runs up Mauna Awakia to this place, which is called Na Pai Pai Kapu, or the Pahumana Mana Oliloa. And if you look up Pai Pai Kapu Oliloa or Pai Pai Oliloa, they'll come up in Nupepa. But this is one of the most important sites for consecrating a chief in our mo'olelo. And each of these mana mana, each of these stones marks a different star line and where the sun rises and sets during the equinoxes and solstices. So the furthest left would be Kealapoloiva Kane. And the furthest right would be Kealapoloiva Kanaloa. So winter solstice. Forget the name of the other solstice. Fall solstice? No, summer solstice. And the middle, the sun will move between this Pai Pai from this Panana, like, which is where you look out from. And so during the equinox, the sun will be here for 3 days. And during the solstices, it'll stay over these Pai Pai, these Mana Mana, for 2 days, which marks the Hawaiian year. And these other constellations are for specific, they're usually dictated by specific ceremonies and specific akua. We're supposed to be done. 150. Okay. And so the next person after Umialiloa to inherit Kūkaʻilimoku is Kamehameha Ekahi. And again, if you follow along Kamakao's Kamo'olelo o Kamehameha Ekahi, ruling chiefs of Hawaii, they talk about different portions, different people that try to get Kūkaʻilimoku, but Kamehameha inherits it. And the way he activates this akua, the way he gives mana to it, is one particular ceremony. And this is where one of the lesser known names of Kamehameha comes from. And this name is a ceremonial name he's given, which is Amamalua. And right here near the bottom, I'm sorry that you cannot see this, but it's in Kanupepaku'oko'a, February 16th, I believe, 1867. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can look it up. What happens is, I'll read the bottom paragraph. E kaumahana no kiwala o inakino. Okay, I'm not going to be able to read it without getting lost. But essentially what happens, sorry, I didn't center it right. But essentially what happens is Kamehameha surreptitiously offers Imakakoloa at the same time the Kivala'o is offering an aku or a fish. And so if you picture on a heiau, when one person is giving an offering, that's them. Usually the ali'i nui of a place is the person who's getting consecrated and they become the most powerful. And Kamehameha sees that the other chief is doing it. He does it at the same time to give himself the same pie, to give himself the same mana as the other ali'i. And this act is called Amamalua. And he gets this nickname, this ceremonial name actually, from Kamanava, who was one of his kahuhanai, one of his chiefly retainers who was wahine. And it's this ceremony, Amamalua, that brings Kūkaʻilimoku back to life after he was put to rest after Umialiloa. So when Kamehameha inherits this Ki'iakua Hulunui, there's different names for it. It's this specific ceremony which gives it mana. And you can find out more about the times of the ceremony, the moon phases, what's necessary in the Mo'olelo of Makalei, which is published, I believe, in roughly 1908. And Kūkaʻilimoku is really essential to Kamehameha's war campaigns to forcefully unite the Hawaiian archipelago. Each instance of him contesting different ali'i, different mo'i, different chiefs and high chiefs is all guided by Kūkaʻilimoku. And in some descriptions, he'll know it's the perfect time to go and take over, to go and challenge after preparation, because the hulu of Kūkaʻilimoku, Kolili Pono Nā Hulu. So at the beginning of this presentation, I say that it's called Kolili Nā Hulu or Kolili Pono Nā Hulu. It's when the feathers stand upright on top of Kūkaʻilimoku that you know you're supposed to go and challenge and issue a challenge to whoever you're challenging. And so if you go to Bishop Museum and you see Kūkaʻilimoku and you see the feathers standing, I'm not saying break that glass and steal it, but I am saying you should at least pay attention to what's going on in our lahu. But go steal it if you can. To kind of close off this space, Tupanina, I just want to talk a little bit about how our kūpuna talk about ea, and especially connect that pauku, that phrase and paragraph and portion of a lei that was brought up by Kamaka earlier relating to Kūkaʻilimoku, snatching the ea of our aina, snatching the ea for our people. And looking at a lei that was composed for Lili'o Kalani. And it's composed by this wahine who is an amazing composer named Nahau Kapu, published in Kaleo Kalahui, December 17th, 1894. And they say, he lei vehi no e kalani, olili'u I ka wahi o nā lani, olili'u I ka walu o nā lani, ai Hawaii I ko lei ali'i, ka nohi kaimana o ke au puni, mai puni o I ka mali a ke ua, a ka ilipu a kea o maleka, puli mai ko alo kapu e kalani, e aloha I ke kupa o ka aina, ai ka poho o ko lima ke olo o ka lahui Hawaii. O ike makali'i me ka elo, o lohe ka uila ka pai o pua, a he pua o ka lani, ai I luna ke ki e no I haleali. A ina ko wahi nona, or I think it's no. E kalani o lili'u kavalu o nā lani. So Nahau Kapu offers a ceremonial name to Lili'u o Kalani, which is Lili'u i kavalu o nā lani. And my interpretation of this mele is on the right side. I'll go through it very quickly. Lay adornment dedicated to you, E Kalani, namely Lili'u i kavalu o nā lani. Within your chiefly lei resides the crown jewel of the nation. Do not be deceived by the useless kajol of the Puakia skin from America with 3 Ks. Turn your sacred face, E Kalani. Send aloha to the long residing of the land. Within the palm of your hands lays the life of the Lahui Hawaii. Makali'i and Ka'elo, stars, and also month names are seen. The lightning of the cloud banks has been heard. Kalani as a flower high above, the heavenly one at Haleali'i, the Haleali'i o Iolani. And the reason I share this mele as an enactment of Ea is central to this specific portion where Mrs. Nahau Kapu says and composes one to Lili o Kalani, but also to her lahui, ai ka poho o ko lima ke olo ka lahui Hawaii. The life, liberty, love of our land is in your hands. Our nationhood is in your hands. It's up to you to enact it. It's up to you to bring out the ea. And so with that kind of framing, it's upon us, it's upon all of you, as Nahau Kapu has said, to enact ea, to bring out the ea, to emerge as Kūkaʻilimoku had and snatch the ea of our lahui. It's up to you and it's up to us to make sure that we remain with class consciousness, that we remain steadfast in reading and learning our mo'olelo, remain steadfast in building pilina with different nations. All of these are portions of enacting ea. These are portions and parts of how we can sustain ourselves. We can emerge as a sovereign, self-determinate nation. Oyano. Mahalo.